Well, the automotive sector is often framed through the lens of manufacturing in South Africa and exports and original equipment manufacturer investment, or the OEMs as we call them. But beneath that sits a vast, often fragmented, and often underappreciated ecosystem. It's one that keeps millions of South Africans mobile, employed, and economically active. And as that ecosystem grapples with aging vehicles. We've got all of these new Chinese entrants into the market and Indian entrants as well. We've got data gaps. We've got the rise of e-mobility. I think the question becomes, who's actually steering the future of mobility in South Africa? I'm Michael Avery, and this is Business Talk. And our guest today is Ipeleng Mabusela, who's the CEO of RMI, which is the Retail Motor Industry Organization. Ipeleng, welcome. Great to have you on. In your recent Business Day interview, you outlined a fairly ambitious 2026 agenda, including the idea of a vehicle data bank. But before we get into that, for those who don't know the RMI, they may have seen the badge somewhere. Who are you? What does the RMI do?
Fantastic, and thanks for having me, Mike. So the RMI stands for the Retail Motor Industry Organization, as you correctly pointed out. And think of it as that badge, that stamp that says if you're dealing with a business that's accredited, that's an RMI member, then it means you have peace of mind. That one, they have qualified people. Two, that they know what they're doing. Three, they treat their people well through our bargaining council called MIPCO that enforces that. And most importantly, that if you have any conflicts or issues or drama, with whether it's a workshop or a dealership or a panel shop or any of those, that you have the ability to reach out to us, and we act a little bit like a marriage counselor to sort of resolve the issues between any consumer and any business that's an RMI member. So that's, I guess, the span, and it covers everything, everything retail and aftermarket. So anything from the time your car is born until the untimely death of your car. So let's call that dealerships, workshops, panel shops, otherwise known as panel beaters back in the day. We don't call them that anymore. They don't like that term. It covers vehicle testing stations, the privately owned ones. It covers bodybuildings when you convert your, let's call it a truck into a water tanker or into an ambulance. It covers engine remanufacturing as well. If there's something wrong with the engine, somebody needs to actually take your engine, fix it, drill out the bores and so forth. It covers all of that. So it covers the entire scope of the retail and aftermarket. And ours is we represent all of those businesses, 8,500 of them to be exact. And we also do wage negotiations on behalf of the retail and aftermarket, covering 300,000 people, 23,000 businesses in the sector.
Wow. I mean, it's truly massive. I think if you look at the scale that you just described, I don't think the automotive aftermarket always gets as much public attention as, say, vehicle manufacturing, for example. We talk about tariffs and, what that might do to our exports, but it plays a significant role, as you've suggested, in the economy. Just how big is the sector in South Africa? And why do you see it as so critically important to these conversations that we have around the future of mobility and obviously employment and economic activity and all of those multipliers?
Yep, absolutely. So, I mean, if you think about the maths and this is directly from Stats SA, after, the automotive sector, to your point, covers the entire value chain from manufacturing, but also all the way to retail when you buy and sell cars, as well as aftermarket once you own your vehicle. From a GDP perspective, the entire sector is close to 6% of GDP, of which retail and aftermarket, our part, is more than half of that, is 55% of that proportion. So we're about 3% of GDP contribution, 202 billion contribution to GDP, significant, as you've said. And in terms of jobs, significantly larger as well than manufacturing. So we cover in the region of 270,000 direct jobs in the sector, can go up to 300,000 in terms of wage negotiations, because we also negotiate wages for component manufacturers as well. But if you compare that to, let's say, jobs that come out of OEM factories and so forth, we're easily in the region of 3 to 4 times larger than them. So quite big. And, Mike, you make a good point about, being vocal. Hence, part of our strategy as well is, one, to be vocal about the sector itself, and also two, to say that our members are around. They exist in every little nook and cranny, small town, big metros, and that if you need something with your vehicle, that's the place to go.
Ipeleng, I think it's so important you talk about this idea of the market understanding what RMI stands for, because the payoff line is a sign that you can trust. And I think that branding campaign really centers around what you represent for motorists when they see it outside of a workshop and a testing center. So, what does that promise actually mean for the consumer and for the industry at the end of the day?
Absolutely. So it's critical that, from an RMI perspective, and it's been around this organization for close to 120 years, actually throwing 120-year celebrations next year. I'll send you an invite, Mike. But essentially, it speaks to we need to be able to set standards. So each, sub-association within the RMI that's got its own specialty, whether that's workshops or dealerships or panel shops, will have a certain standard that it's set as a minimum that our members need to adhere to. And that includes equipment, tools, special tools and so forth. It's people that you've hired, all of those things, which we check on a regular basis to ensure you meet that standard. So that means as a consumer and also as a business, a lot of our members get business directly from government through the RT46 contract, but also directly from other entities, insurance companies, fleet companies, and so forth. That means that you can have confidence in the ability of that particular company to do the work and to do it fairly, including pricing and the way that they treat their customers. We take it quite seriously. Members that do breach our code of conduct and so forth, there are serious consequences, and some of the consequences can be being removed from the organization as a means to protect that sign. Another important thing to add is we do have people out there who put on our sign falsely and pretend to be members. You can imagine that it brings them some customers. To educate customers, there is a QR code on the bottom of our certificate that you can ask to see and you can scan, and that'll take you directly to our website, and it'll tell you whether or not that person is truly a member of the RMI or not. I'm feeling that, of course, you can always reach out to us and give us a call, and we'll confirm. No problem.
No, that's great to hear, because I think so often when one goes out of maybe an OEM ecosystem, you go into the aftermarket for a repair or a vehicle service, you need to have that confidence and that trust that you're dealing with someone who is not a fly-by-night, who's not going to rip you off. How does accreditation then fit into this? I would imagine that plays a big role in the context of what you've just described, being a member of the RMI, being able to show that to the consumer. And how does it protect consumers at the end of the day?
Absolutely. So within the RMI, because we are an employers association, right? Think of us as the opposite of a labor union, but at the same time, also a trade association. We deal with things that have to do with, policy in the sector, advocacy, and so forth. When we have people within the retail and aftermarket who are part of the bargaining council approaches, they can become members of the RMI with some minimum criteria. Now, they're not allowed to display the logo because they are not accredited members. And that's the next step. Accreditation means meeting a certain set of standards which are particular to each sub-association. So as an example, if you want to be an accredited workshop, there's a standard that says, do you have an oil trap for how you manage your waste products coming from the oil you need to dispose of to be environmentally safe? Do you have the right kinds of machinery like hoists and so forth and special tools? Do you have qualified artisans to do work on all of those vehicles? And that's what the accreditation means. And that's the only time you'll be able to display that RMI logo and badge. And that's where, for consumers, that's what gives you the confidence and the comfort that somebody else who's an expert has gone to go look and has gone to go make sure and say this business is good enough to be able to do the kind of work that it says it can do.
So look for the RMI badge. Absolutely critical with whomever you're dealing with if you want that peace of mind as a consumer. There's another important conversation that we have to have. And often, we approach Easter and we have all of these horrific statistics at the end of Easter about how many people have died on the roads. We know anyone who travels out to Moria, for example, there is the big ZCC migration, call it what you will, but so often it's marred by terrible statistics of road deaths. Obviously, we need to focus on driver behavior. We need to focus on drinking and driving and alcohol and law enforcement. Very important. But you've argued that there's another critical factor often overlooked. What's missing from the national road safety discussion?
Absolutely. And I mean, we do some collaborations as well, the Department of Transport on some of those initiatives, to your point about driver behavior and about the conditions of the roads, right? But the third factor that leads to accidents and eventually fatalities is the condition of the vehicle itself. And oftentimes, that's the stats on that are underreported. And we want to do a study with the department to be able to do some better research on the contribution to that. But if your vehicle is not in good condition before you hit the road, right? Not only in Easter, but in general, then the likelihood of an accident is high. Think about your brakes, think about your wipers, think about your lights. So we make a plea to the consumers, plea to vehicle owners, truck owners, taxi owners to get their vehicles checked. All right, two ways. Option one, you take it to either your dealership or your workshop to make sure that it's properly serviced and make sure that it's up to standard. Another way is, of course, is to get it to a vehicle testing station, and they will tell you where the issues are, like on your brakes and so forth. So it's critical that we do this not only for Easter but throughout the year. The average age of a vehicle, Mike, interestingly enough, in South Africa, is 10.8 years old. Yeah, that implies that our vehicle fleet is full of cars that are not brand new, not out of the box, not within warranty, not within maintenance plan. That tells you that roughly 70 to 80% of vehicles are outside of that maintenance plan or some sort of service plan. And therefore, it's incumbent on the owner of the vehicle to then start doing their own periodic checks on those vehicles. You and I both know old vehicles don't tell you it's time for a service per se, right? If you have an old vehicle, you need to make sure that you check either, if it's been a year since your last service, or you check the mileage. Different vehicles having different mileage. So that's our plea, I guess, to owners of vehicles out there.
That's a staggering statistic, that the average age is well over 10 years. And clearly that poses all sorts of risks for road safety if you're not maintaining that vehicle, if you're not doing the regular service checks. And I mean, it just makes good vehicle ownership sense, and being responsible with your servicing. Often you avoid any major breakdowns down the line if you just keep up with those consistent major and minor services and filter and oil changes and brake changes. Then often you can actually extend the life of the vehicle so much more, and it'll save you money over a period of time as well. So I know many people might say, oh, we can't afford it. Well, the thing is, you can't afford not to, because you're playing with your life if you don't get your vehicle tested. And I couldn't support this any more wholeheartedly. Often when I'm driving on the road and I look at an older vehicle, and you can almost see that a vehicle is unroadworthy, and you think, how is that vehicle on the road? But you've, as the RMI, raised the issue of periodic vehicle testing, and it's widely used internationally. How would this type of system help improve safety? Because I think we've got to go beyond just leaning into people's sense of responsibility. I think it almost has to be regulated. There's got to be a more structural way of solving this problem. So tell me a little bit more about this initiative.
Absolutely. So we've had various discussions with the National Department of Transport on the topic. If you think about it, to your point, on a global level, even countries like Nigeria have got a better vehicle testing regime than we do. We are far behind international standards. Today in South Africa, trucks and buses need to be tested every 6 months or annually, respectively. But that's not the case for passenger vehicles. Legislation was written to propose that for vehicles that are older than 2 years, or that are older, than 10 years, that they get tested annually, give or take. But we need the department, in particular the minister, to put a date to that. I think this has been ongoing for more than 10 years to try to get that through. And the argument is, if we know the condition of vehicles on the road and it's enforced, to your point, we're not only relying on people's goodwill and hearts to go and get their vehicles to be in the right order, but we're also applying enforcement on it. Enforcement is not always good. It's not always easy, but when you're talking about people's lives, I think it's absolutely necessary for us to do that. I mean, we have sufficient in the country vehicle testing stations, whether government owned or private owned. And as you know, business will respond to any piece of legislation with their own ways. There's been conversations around, yeah, but how would we get it done? Would we be able to manage the traffic? Yes, business is always ready to respond with technology and business models that can support it. Think about it, crazy business models like, can somebody come to your house to come pick up the car and bring it back, right? Provided that they show you that they're the right person, all of those things, so that you don't have to worry about for example, waiting at a testing station. So there are these kinds of things that exist. Last year, I did a voluntary campaign with the Deputy Minister of Transport called "It Starts With You." They got my car tested. My car's a 2018 model. I was a little bit nervous, but it passed the test, right? And you could see the amount of detail they go into when they're doing this kind of inspection on your vehicle. And you can imagine, to your point, some of these vehicles that we see every day on our roads would not pass any sort of vehicle roadworthy.
Yeah, I can't support that any more wholeheartedly. We've got to move to something that's a bit more structural in terms of using. Yes, sometimes you've got to use carrot, but sometimes you've got to use stick, because we're talking about people's lives, and we can't just continue to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. I mean, that's the definition of madness at Ipeleng. Just in closing, obviously with the holiday travel approaching, traffic volumes increasing, what practical steps would you like to see motorists taking now before they get on the road?
I mean, Easter, we know, to your point about, the N1 to Morea, people traveling on their holidays and so forth. So first thing, it's raining quite a lot lately. Get your wipers checked and probably replaced. Nothing worse than having poor visibility on a stormy day. Two, go to your nearest RMI workshop, a dealership, as well as testing station to ensure that you're able to get your car checked and serviced before you go. Easy to find us on our website. There's a little link called Find an Accredited Member. You simply punch in, the area that you're in, and it's going to give you a full list of them. You can pick one and you can drive straight to them. Available also on Google Maps. So that'd be our advice to motorists. Make sure, take care of your family. Nothing worse than your brakes failing or your tires not having enough tread depth, which dramatically increases your stopping distance. That'd be our message and our plea to motorists for this Easter.
Or you just break down, and instead of having a lovely Easter weekend with your family celebrating, half of it is spent on the side of the road, stuck. I mean, there's nothing worse. And I think it's happened to many of us as well. But also importantly, Ipeleng, go to an RMI accredited dealer, because then you have that peace of mind as well. Thank you so much, Ipeleng Mabusela, CEO of the Retail Motor Industry Organization, just unpacking why it is a sign that you can trust with us here on Business Talk.
Thank you so much, Michael, and have a great day further.